My 18th birthday started with the sound of metal. Not balloons, not candles, metal. I woke up to the sharp click of something locking in the kitchen. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. Then I heard my mother's voice, calm and satisfied. Perfect. When I walked out, she was standing in front of the refrigerator, holding a small silver padlock in her hand like it was a trophy. She didn't look at me when she said it. "You're 18 now." I blinked. "Okay." She finally turned, folding her arms. "Adults pay rent. Adults pay for food." I laughed, because I genuinely thought she was joking. She wasn't. "If you want to eat in this house," she continued, "you contribute. Starting today." I stared at the lock hanging from the fridge handles. It looked absurd, childish, cruel. "I already help with groceries," I said quietly. She tilted her head. "Help? You eat more than you help?" That was the moment something inside me shifted, because I knew the truth. I had been working since I was 16, after school, weekends, holidays. I paid for my own school supplies, my own phone, my own bus pass, and every month, I transferred money to her account labeled groceries. She had never once thanked me. Instead, she told relatives that I was expensive, that I did nothing around the house, that she was counting the days until I was legally an adult. Apparently, she had been counting more carefully than I thought. "How much?" I asked. She named an amount that made my stomach drop. It was more than half of what I earned in a month. "That's ridiculous," she shrugged. "Then find somewhere else to live." Her confidence told me something important. She didn't think I would, because I never fought back. I never raised my voice. I never embarrassed her. I simply nodded. "Fine." Her eyes flickered with surprise. Just for a second. I went to my room and transferred the money. She unlocked the fridge that evening. Inside was leftover rice and half a container of soup. "That's your portion," she said. I stared at the shelves. The shelves I had been filling, the milk I had paid for, the vegetables I had bought, the meat charged to the card linked to my account. But she didn't know that. She thought the money in her wallet stretched further than it did. She didn't know the card she used at the supermarket was a secondary card, attached to me. She had never asked. She had never checked, because in her mind, she was the provider. That night, I ate my portion slowly. Not because I was savoring it, because I was thinking, if I was already paying to survive here, why was I still staying? The lock clicked shut again after dinner, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a daughter. I felt like a tenant who had just realized she was the landlord. The lock on the refrigerator became part of the house. It hung there every day. A small silver reminder that I was no longer a daughter in my own home, but a cost that needed to be controlled. My mother treated it like a life lesson she was proud to teach. She told our neighbor one afternoon, loud enough for me to hear from my bedroom, that young people today need discipline. Discipline. I woke up at 6 every morning for school. I worked until 9 at night 3 days a week at a grocery store. On weekends, I covered extra shifts. My hands were always dry from handling cardboard and receipts. I was tired in a way that never showed on the outside because I had learned not to complain. Still, she spoke as if I contributed nothing. What she didn't understand was that the grocery store where I worked gave employees a debit card for internal purchases. It was linked directly to my bank account. When my mother lost her own card months ago and complained about it, I offered to add her as a secondary user to mine. I told her it would be easier for both of us. She never asked how it worked. She only accepted it. Every bag of rice, every carton of eggs, every bottle of cooking oil had been paid from my account. The first week after she locked the fridge, I kept everything normal. I transferred the rent she demanded. I didn't argue. I didn't change my behavior. I let her believe she had taken control. But quietly, I began preparing. I went to the bank during my lunch break and asked to remove the secondary cardholder. My hands trembled slightly as I signed the form, not because I felt guilty, but because I understood what this meant. Once I did this, There would be no going back to pretending. The bank employee asked politely, "Would you like to notify the other user?" "No," I said. "It's fine." That night, I searched for a room to rent. Nothing fancy, just a small space with a bed, a window, and a door that locked from the inside without someone else holding the key. I found one above a small tailor shop 10 minutes away from my job. The rent was cheaper than what my mother had been charging me. That realization made something in my chest tighten. I paid the deposit the following afternoon. At home, nothing changed on the surface. The fridge still clicked shut every evening. My mother still measured my portion. She still reminded me that adulthood meant responsibility. I nodded every time. But inside, something was growing. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. The final moment came on a Thursday night. I had just finished packing a single suitcase. I didn't own much. Clothes, a few books, my documents, the small jewelry box my grandmother had given me before she passed away. I left the rest behind. If my mother believed I owed her for living there, she could keep whatever she thought balanced the debt. She was in the living room watching television when I walked out with my suitcase. She glanced at it, confused. "Where are you going?" "I found a place," I said calmly. "It's closer to work." Her expression shifted, not to sadness, but irritation. "Don't be dramatic. You'll be back in a week." I placed an envelope on the coffee table. Inside was the key to my bedroom and printed bank statements from the past year. I had highlighted every grocery transaction. The total at the bottom of the page was circled. She didn't open it immediately. I didn't wait for her to. When I stepped outside, the night air felt colder than usual, but it also felt wide, open. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells inside my own thoughts. I was just walking forward. The next morning, I was at work when my phone began vibrating nonstop. Missed call, missed call, missed call. Then a message. "Why is the card not working?" I imagined her standing at the supermarket checkout. Groceries already scanned. People waiting behind her. I imagined the cashier trying again, then shaking their head. "Payment declined." I didn't answer immediately. I finished my shift first. I stacked shelves. I smiled at customers. I carried boxes like any other day. When I finally checked my phone again, there were more messages. "Did you do something to the account? This is not funny. Call me back." I replied with one sentence. "I removed the card yesterday." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "You can't do that. We need food." I stared at that message for a long time. For years, we had meant my responsibility, my contribution, my sacrifice. Now it sounded different. "I thought adults pay for their own food," I typed. There was no response after that. That evening, sitting on the edge of my new bed in a small room that smelled faintly of fabric and detergent from the tailor shop below, I opened a plastic container of noodles I had bought with my own money. No one measured it. No one locked it away. It wasn't a grand meal. It wasn't expensive. But it was mine. And somewhere across town, for the first time, my mother opened a refrigerator that was still full of food, but no longer full of control. The only person who had truly been paying was gone. And this time, there was no lock that could bring her back. The first week after I left, my phone rang every morning. At first, my mother called as if this were a temporary disagreement, something that would pass once I calmed down. Her voice messages carried the same tone she used when scolding me for coming home 5 minutes late. "You're being childish. You don't understand how hard it is to run a household. You embarrassed me at the store." That last one was the only honest sentence. She wasn't upset that she couldn't buy groceries. She was upset that people had seen her card decline. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply stopped responding. Silence did something arguments never could. It forced her to sit alone with the truth. 3 days later, she showed up at my workplace. I saw her through the glass doors while I was restocking cereal boxes. She stood stiffly near the entrance, scanning the store as if she were inspecting something she owned. For a second, I felt 16 again. Small, nervous, ready to apologize for something I hadn't done. But I wasn't 16. I walked toward her slowly. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She lowered her voice, but her jaw was tight. "You think this is funny? I had to borrow money from Mrs. Tran next door." The image was clear in my mind. My mother, who used to tell everyone she sacrificed everything for her ungrateful daughter, now asking neighbors for grocery money. "I paid for groceries for almost 2 years," I said. "You just didn't know it." She blinked as if I had spoken in another language. "That's impossible. I was the one shopping." "Yes," I said gently, "with my card." Her eyes moved, calculating. I could almost see the math forming behind her silence. She had never checked the statements. She had never asked where the money came from. She had simply assumed it was hers to use. "You're exaggerating," she muttered. I took my phone out and opened the banking app. I showed her the transaction history, date after date, total after total. Her face slowly drained of color. "You should have told me," she whispered. But it didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like accusation. "I tried," I replied. "You didn't want to hear it." For years, I had mentioned helping with bills. She would wave her hand dismissively and say, "It's the least you can do." That sentence had covered everything. It erased effort. It erased sacrifice. Now there was nothing to hide behind. "You owe me rent," she said suddenly, grasping for control. I almost smiled at how predictable that was. "I paid you rent the day I turned 18, I reminded her. "More than this room costs." She had no answer for that. Customers were beginning to look at us. My manager glanced over from the register. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but not from shame, from exposure. The truth was standing under bright supermarket lights, and there was nowhere to move it. "You're making me look like a bad mother," she said quietly. The sentence hung between us. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to protect her image. "I didn't lock the fridge," I answered. That was the end of the conversation. She left without another word. That night, I expected to feel guilty. I expected to lie awake replaying her expression, questioning myself, wondering if I had gone too far. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not happiness, peace. The kind that comes when you stop carrying something that was never yours to carry. A week later, my aunt called me. "She says you abandoned her," my aunt said carefully. "She says you cut her off financially." I took a deep breath before answering. "Ask her who paid for groceries last year." There was a long pause. "I didn't know," my aunt admitted softly. Most people didn't. My mother had built her story carefully. She was the hard-working single parent. I was the difficult daughter who cost too much and helped too little. The truth had been quiet, invisible, easy to ignore, until it stopped. 2 weeks after I moved out, my mother finally texted something different. Not anger, not accusation. Just one sentence. "The fridge is empty." I stared at the message for a long time. For 18 years, that fridge had been a symbol of survival, of control, of power. She had locked it to teach me a lesson about adulthood. Now it was unlocked and empty. I typed back slowly. "Mine isn't." I wasn't trying to be cruel. I wasn't celebrating her struggle. I was stating a fact. I had learned to survive long before she forced me to. The difference now was simple. I was no longer surviving under her roof. I was surviving on my own. And the strangest part of all? For the first time, food tasted like freedom. A month passed before she asked where I was staying. Not because she missed me, because she needed something. Her text came late at night. "Send me your address." I stared at the screen, already knowing this wasn't about reconciliation. If she wanted to talk, she would have asked how I was. If she wanted to fix things, she would have started with an apology. Instead, she sent another message. "I need to pick up some of the things you took." I looked around my small room. A narrow bed, a wooden desk, a single shelf with folded clothes. I hadn't taken anything expensive. I hadn't taken anything that wasn't mine. Still, I sent the address. Part of growing up, I was learning, meant not running anymore. She arrived the next afternoon. The tailor downstairs knocked gently on my door and said, "Your mother is here." I walked down the narrow staircase and saw her standing outside the building, looking up at it with thinly disguised judgment. The place was modest. The paint was peeling in places. Laundry hung from a line across the courtyard. She used to say I deserved better. What she meant was that I deserved better as long as she controlled it. "This is where you live?" she asked. "Yes." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and looked around my room. Her eyes scanned everything. The small refrigerator in the corner, the kettle on the desk, the simple curtains over the window. "You left for this?" "I left for peace," I replied. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked to the small fridge and opened it. Inside were eggs, vegetables, milk, and leftovers from the night before. Nothing luxurious, just enough. She closed it slowly. "I didn't think you would last," she said. "I know." Her shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered. Not physically smaller, but less certain. For years, she had been loud, confident in her authority. Now she stood in a room that proved I didn't need it. "I can't keep up with expenses," she admitted finally. "Rent went up, utilities too." There it was. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "I was wrong." Just finances. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. "I was helping before," I said carefully. "You just didn't see it as help. You never told me it was that much." "I did," I answered. "You called it my responsibility." She sat down on the edge of my bed, quiet for a long moment. "When I locked the fridge," she said slowly, "I thought I was teaching you how the world works." I held her gaze. "The world doesn't lock food away from people who are already paying for it." That sentence seemed to land somewhere deeper than the bank statements ever could. For the first time, she didn't argue. Instead, she looked tired. "I didn't think you would actually leave," she confessed. That was the heart of it. She had believed I would endure anything, that I would always choose discomfort over independence because it was familiar, because it was what I had been raised to accept. I didn't think I would either, I admitted. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't sharp like before. It wasn't a battlefield. It was simply space between two people trying to understand what had happened. "Are you struggling?" she asked quietly. It was the closest she had come to asking how I was. "I'm working," I said. "I'm paying my bills. I'm eating. I'm sleeping better than I have in years." She nodded slowly. The control was gone. The leverage was gone. There was no fridge to lock here. No rent to threaten me with. If we were going to have any kind of relationship now, it would have to be built without power. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. Her voice didn't carry pride anymore. It carried uncertainty. "You don't fix it with money," I replied. "You fix it by admitting what happened." Her eyes glistened slightly, though she blinked quickly as if embarrassed by the feeling. "I was afraid," she said. "Afraid that once you grew up, you wouldn't need me." I let that settle between us. "You made sure I didn't," I said gently. That hurt her more than any accusation could have. We didn't hug. We didn't suddenly become close. Real life doesn't wrap itself in perfect endings. But when she stood up to leave, she paused at the door. "I won't lock the fridge again," she said quietly. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the first crack in the wall. After she left, I sat down at my desk and ate a simple dinner I had cooked myself. Outside the window, the sounds of the street drifted upward. Motorbikes passing. Someone laughing. A child calling for their mother. I thought about how something as small as a lock had once defined my entire sense of worth. Now it was just metal, and I was no longer standing on the outside of it. I was standing on my own. After that visit, something changed, but not all at once. My mother didn't transform overnight into someone soft and understanding. She didn't suddenly become warm or affectionate. What changed first was her tone. The sharp edges in her voice slowly disappeared. The accusations stopped. The late-night messages demanding explanations became shorter, then less frequent. 2 weeks later, she called again. "I made too much soup," she said. "Do you want some?" It was such an ordinary sentence that it almost made me laugh. For years, food had been a weapon in our house. Now it sounded like an offering. "I can come by," I replied. When I walked into the house that weekend, the fridge stood open, unlocked. There was no metal glinting between the handles, no barrier, no symbol of authority. She noticed me looking at it. "I took it off," she said quietly. I nodded. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had announced that adulthood meant paying rent. The air felt different now, not tense, but careful. Like we were both stepping on new ground. She poured soup into a bowl and slid it toward me without measuring the portion. I didn't know how scared I was. She began, staring at her hands. "When you turned 18, I kept thinking, if you leave, I'll be alone. And if you stay without rules, I'll lose control." Her voice trembled slightly. "I thought if I made you pay, it would prove you still needed me." I let her words sink in. "For years," I said slowly, "I didn't feel needed. I felt managed." That was harder for her to hear than the financial truth. Money could be calculated. Control was harder to admit. She nodded, eyes glossy. I was wrong. It was the first time she had said it clearly. No excuses, no shifting blame. The word hung in the air between us like something fragile. Wrong. I didn't rush to forgive her. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a process built on repeated behavior. But I did something important that day. I didn't reject her. "I'm not your enemy," I said. "I was trying to help. I just didn't know how to say it in a way you would respect." She covered her mouth for a moment, as if holding back something she had spent years refusing to show. "I told everyone you were ungrateful," she whispered. "I see now that you were carrying more than I was." The admission didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy, because it meant we both had been living inside a story that wasn't true. That afternoon, we did something simple. We went grocery shopping together. This time, when we reached the checkout, she pulled out her own card. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't effortless. But it worked. She paid, and she didn't look at me for help. That small action mattered more than any apology. Before I left, she walked me to the door. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "You won't," I answered honestly. "But I'm not coming back to live here." She nodded. "I know." As I stepped outside, I realized something important. Leaving hadn't destroyed our relationship. It had exposed it. The lock on the fridge had been about control, but my leaving had been about boundaries. And boundaries, I was learning, are not punishments. They are protection. That night, back in my small apartment, I opened my own refrigerator and stared at the shelves for a long moment. Food sat there freely, no locks, no rules attached to it, no conditions. But what felt even more important was this. I no longer needed to prove my worth by how much I paid, how much I endured, or how quietly I suffered. I had left not because I hated her. I had left because I finally understood my value. And sometimes, the only way for someone to realize what you were giving all along is for you to stop giving it. For the first time in our lives, the fridge wasn't empty. Neither was the space between us. It was just different. And this time, it was honest. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that afternoon. Healing is quieter than conflict. It does not shout. It does not slam doors. It moves slowly. Sometimes so slowly you wonder if anything is changing at all. In the months that followed, my mother began working part-time at a small bakery nearby. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay much, but it was steady. The first time she told me about it, she sounded almost shy. "I start at 6 in the morning," she said. "It's harder than I thought." I understood what she wasn't saying. For years, she had framed herself as the only one carrying weight. Now she was discovering how heavy it actually was. "I'm proud of you," I said. The words surprised both of us. She blinked, then nodded once. We began meeting once a week for tea. Not at her house, not at mine. Neutral ground. A small cafe halfway between us. At first, the conversations were careful. Weather, work, small updates. But gradually, the space between us grew less fragile. One afternoon, she brought something wrapped in cloth. "I found this while cleaning," she said. Inside was the small silver padlock. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I kept it," she admitted. "I don't even know why." I looked at it differently now. It no longer represented hunger or humiliation. It represented a turning point. "You can throw it away," I said gently. She shook her head. "No, I think I'll keep it." To remind myself. That was the first time I saw real accountability in her eyes. Not fear of losing money, not fear of embarrassment, but fear of repeating the same mistake. Over time, something else shifted too. She stopped telling people I was ungrateful. In fact, one evening my aunt called me again. "Your mom told everyone you were helping with groceries all along," she said. She said she didn't see it clearly back then. Hearing that felt strange, not triumphant, just lighter. For so long, I had been defending myself in silence. Now I didn't have to. But the most important change didn't happen in public. It happened inside me. There were nights in my apartment when I would open my fridge and feel a wave of memory, of being measured, restricted, evaluated. Trauma does not disappear just because the situation ends. But now, instead of shrinking, I would remind myself, "You left. You survived. You built this." One evening, about 6 months after I moved out, my mother invited me over for dinner again. This time, she handed me a spare key. "You don't live here," she said carefully, "but this is still your home if you ever need it." I held the key in my palm. It wasn't about access to the house. It was about trust. "I won't abuse it," I said softly. "I know," she replied, and for the first time, I believe she truly did. Before I left that night, she opened the refrigerator casually while we were talking, searching for dessert. It was such an ordinary movement that it almost made me emotional. No locks, no tension, no unspoken threats. Just a fridge, just food, just a mother and daughter trying again. As I walked home under the streetlights, I thought about how something so small had once carried so much power. A lock can protect, a lock can control, a lock can wound, but walking away from it, that had been the hardest and bravest thing I had ever done. And now, when I open my own refrigerator at night, I no longer see survival. I see choice. I see independence. I see a young woman who stopped paying for love with silence and started demanding it with boundaries. The only person who had truly been paying for everything back then was me. But the most valuable thing I paid for wasn't groceries. It was freedom, and it was worth every cent. Nearly a year passed before the old pattern tried to return. It happened quietly. My mother called one evening and asked if I could help her, just this once. The bakery had reduced her hours. Rent was due. She sounded tired, but there was something familiar in the way she said it, like she already assumed the answer would be yes. For a moment, the old instinct rose inside me. The reflex to fix things, to transfer money, to carry weight before anyone asked how heavy it was. But this time, I paused. "Are you asking for help?" I said carefully. "Or are you expecting it?" Silence filled the line. That question would have been impossible for me to ask a year ago. "I'm asking," she replied finally. The difference mattered. I didn't rush to open my banking app. Instead, I asked questions. What had happened? What were her options? Had she spoken to her landlord? Could she increase shifts elsewhere? We talked like adults, not like a parent issuing rules to a child, not like a child trying to earn approval. In the end, I offered to cover a portion of the rent, not all of it, and I was clear about it. This is support, I said, not responsibility. She agreed, and for the first time, she paid me back 2 months later, not because I demanded it, because she chose to. That small repayment felt bigger than any apology she had ever given. Around that same time, something unexpected happened at work. I was promoted to assistant manager. It wasn't a dramatic leap, but it meant stability. It meant my effort had been seen. When I told my mother, she smiled in a way I hadn't seen before, not proud in a possessive way, not proud because she felt responsible for my success, just proud. You did that on your own, she said. Yes, I replied, and I realized something important. For years, I had wanted her to admit I was capable. Now I didn't need her to. I already knew. One afternoon, I returned to her house to help fix a leaking faucet. As I worked under the sink, I noticed something on the counter, the old padlock. But this time, it wasn't near the refrigerator. It was placed beside a small plant by the window. You kept it there? I asked. She nodded. It reminds me that fear makes people do ugly things, she said quietly. And control isn't love. That sentence settled deep inside me. Control isn't love. I had grown up confusing the two. Rules without warmth. Authority without listening. Sacrifice used as leverage. But love, I was learning, is quieter. It allows space. It doesn't demand payment to exist. When I finished fixing the faucet, she made tea. We sat at the table again. You were strong to leave, she said suddenly. I shook my head. I was scared. Strength isn't the absence of fear, she replied. It's leaving anyway. Hearing that from her felt like closing a chapter I hadn't known how to finish. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my fridge and started cooking dinner. I moved slowly, calmly, aware of how different life felt now. The fridge was still just a fridge, but the meaning had changed. It no longer symbolized survival or control. It symbolized something simple and powerful, self-sufficiency. I thought about 18-year-old me, staring at a lock and feeling small. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her this. You are not a burden. You are not expensive. You are not ungrateful. You were carrying more than anyone saw, and when you walked away, you didn't destroy your family. You gave it a chance to become healthier. Months later, during a small family gathering, someone jokingly said, "Remember when she ran away?" Before I could respond, my mother corrected them. She didn't run away, she said firmly. She moved out because I made it hard to stay. The room went quiet, not in a dramatic way, just in a real way. I looked at her, and she didn't look ashamed. She looked honest. That was the real ending. Not revenge, not humiliation, not abandonment. Honesty. The night I left, she realized the only person paying for groceries was gone. But what she eventually understood was something deeper. The only person quietly holding everything together had walked out the door. And instead of collapsing, the house had to learn to stand differently. So did we. And now, when I open my fridge at night, I don't think about what I lost. I think about what I built. Freedom, boundaries, a relationship that exists by choice, not by control. And that has been the most nourishing thing of all.